For these types of projects, you always are going to have a human in the loop, especially when it's healthcare or compliance. So that from operational perspective, operations perspective.
There's always a guardrail. The LLM's not going to get to the end user unless it's very consistent or it gets past that guardrail, and it just can't.
The basic, I would say we started with a basically secure system with rough edges, and we are smoothing out those edges as we go.
Welcome back to another episode of the Code and Cognition podcast. Today I have 3 software engineers sitting with me who have been day in and day out working on agentic systems, both on LLM workloads and workflows, as well as agents themselves, securing your workload. So you have a production workload, and that was the goal from the onset of this project. Did you know
Yes.
starting out what safe enough was going to be for production? Or how did you end up getting it safe enough to be in the customer's hands?
Well, we inherited a project that was safe enough to start with, and we're making it consistently safer as we go on. Would that be a reasonable summary, Scott?
Yes.
And then safe enough, right?
And
So
like all of the messages, they're getting reviewed on every day to see, are they accurate? Where did they break down when they did? It's all safe enough.
yeah, safe enough. So I mean, first of all, like though the messages are automatically sent, there is a buffer period. In other words, the messages that are composed and then ready to go automatically, they go out on the hour, and the administrators have an opportunity to review them all, right? So there's a human in the loop. For these types of projects, you always are going to have a human in the loop, especially when it's healthcare or compliance. So that from operational perspective, operations perspective. But from the architectural and the governance perspective, also things we had to do, right? There's obviously a BAA with the with the LLM providers, right? But that was already in place. Now, then we went in there, and then basically, whenever we're Scott, you can probably talk to this. Whenever work to redact, right, to log from the logs, making sure that nothing is checked into the code base that has anything to do with PHI, and maybe other things, Scott, you might want to mention in that vein.
Yeah, we're like splitting out the architecture for the main production account for split from a staging account, so they live in completely segregated separate areas. That's another thing. And yeah, getting BAA agreements for all of our like cloud providers.
Yes, the messaging providers, the LLM, right, itself, the cloud infrastructure also, right, to make sure there are there are even right now where not all the third party providers have like full security. It was a HIPAA compliant, so we've been basically identifying those and replacing those aspects. So that's an ongoing concern. So the basic, I would say we started with a basically secure system with rough edges, and we are smoothing out those edges as we go.
Sure, and then so you're smoothing out these edges by like continuing to implement or adding new kind of standard best practice patterns of sort of architecting, as well as really designing, I think, what some new operational systems with the organization to just so they have the most opportunity to align that all of the messaging that sits within their domain is going to be appropriate for their customer facing and own compliance levels. So that's quite great that you're also adding that in.
And then, I don't know if I mentioned already, this auditability is quite a thing. It's an audit log system. So what the system is doing and what humans are doing are all in an audit system.
Yeah, everything's traceable, like who did what at what time.
When, yes, exactly. So yeah, HIPAA compliance. basic HIPAA compliance, and then eventually SOC 2 compliance is what we're aiming for, right? Which is, as you know, it's just a bunch of regulations, and yeah, and it's a thing that is ongoing.
Oh yes, oh yes. I know everyone's ears perked up, or everyone's ears perked up when they heard SOC 2 compliance. We all have a story about that. Now, in terms of the auditability, so as there's this level of being able to see who's doing what, but I'm interested to see what sort of auditability or telemetry you may have, and maybe this is really more of a lean back to the testing suite, but some auditability in how the LLM you're using changes. I know from time to time, companies are updating their models. Sometimes they're releasing notes of what
Oh
they
yes,
changed. Other times they're not. And if you're not careful, a system that you had already proven out is no longer going to work as well. And so are you able to sort of see in your systems like, oh, wow, Anthropic made an update, and now this is the reason why we have some drift? Or is the testing suite that you kind of have forcing the sort of really enforcing the business logic outside of these changes?
absolutely. From the beginning, as I said, we in earlier segment, we built from the get-go a test runner, basically a library. It allows us to capture real-world test cases safely, and they are actually simulated conversations, right, with patients, but not real actual data, right? So, but they're real conversations. Now, with all their various, you know, nuances, right? What and so we basically over the last 5 months we've been building up a library of like all the possible cases. And how many do we have now, Daniel? Like maybe 300,
Yeah,
something like
200
that, right?
something. Yeah.
200 something. So these are 200 use cases that we can basically run segments of or the whole thing. And what's really nice is that the way this is organized is that we have an abstraction where you can call a provider or that provider's version, right? So about a month ago, we upgraded from GPT 4.0 to 5.4, and to see what actually that did to our test cases. And we ran the whole suite in 4.0, and that's fine. Ran it in 5.4, and we were confused as to why lots of like these particular test cases were failing. It turns out there was the change to 5.4. The bot is more literal than 4.0, which reflected in the cases. It was, in other words, there is more inference happening in 4.0. That's the best that I could see. Um, and recently, I tried to switch over to Anthropic to see how Claude did, which was very interesting to see that it wasn't just a slam dunk that it was much better, which was actually kind of confusing because a lot of the prompting was built on Claude, so we thought it would be better on Claude. But it turns out that uh, that we could see it was not like immediately a 100% improvement. But basically, we have the ability to do comparisons between major and minor version upgrades,
Yeah.
right? On all of the whole suite or just parts of it that might be sensitive to the upgrade. Uh, Anything to add there, Daniel?
Yeah, I would say even going from 5.2 to 5.4, we had 5.2 in a couple places around the app, and that still introduced variance. That still introduced test failures. But also, we talked about it in the previous segment, but how like our testing system is segmented out. And so, if something broke in the teeth cleaning section, we can fix that after the model upgrade. We were able to more like, I don't know, it didn't end up being this massive sprawling change where you just kind of hope everything goes forward and it's thousands of lines of changes. We could move things forward in smaller chunks, which was nice.
That's right. An interesting thing though to note is that we're working on now to make our test cases a little cheaper to run, because the more test cases, the more expensive it is to call the model, right?
Yep.
So making them run faster and making them run cheaper is like a current goal.
Yep.
But they've been useful so far as is.
Yep. Yeah, and with that, like some of the tests, like if you have many days worth of a conversation where you're actually testing, that's why you do need all those messages in there because there's context to get to that point. That's what Aaron is meaning, like by we've made it cheaper, we've been able to kind of like fast forward to what is actually relevant in our test. So that's been very, very nice and also quicker.
Yeah.
It seems like some invaluable functionality that you've been able to build, because I think when it comes to what's one of the scariest words in enterprise negotiations, it's like vendor lock-in, everyone's favorite two-word phrase. And I think this has been always a consideration when it comes to choosing your model and choosing who owns the proprietary code under your LLM, and being able to design your own system to where you have more autonomy in how that LLM is being deployed inside your business. Because ultimately, as business owners, it doesn't really matter. Is Anthropic the one holding the code, or OpenAI? We have a customer that has a need, and I need to use this technology to deliver the need. And so, hearing you talk about this workflow that you've built, and that it also is maybe helping me on some of those major issues and problems that affect the business down the line, is very novel in terms of what I've heard before. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, it also allows us to kind of choose. Maybe we haven't proved this yet. Maybe Claude is better at doing the structured and data extraction, and but open AI's cheaper models are okay for the composing part. You can kind of choose what's best of breed. So it's not just vendor lock-in from that. One vendor is holding us, but we can choose the best one for the right task, right? So, and that's the kind of optimization I'm hoping to perform over the next couple while here.
Excellent. Well, please don't be shy in letting me know how, and letting everyone know how that goes, because I think we'll be at the edge
Oh
of our
yeah,
seats to see that. Maybe the only other question that's kind of listed is like, where should the LLM not be allowed to act? But I think we talked about that a little bit.
where the LLM should be not be allowed to act.
I feel like with our system, it's so strict. Like we've got like the idea of safe to send messages, and also we've got like we've enabled it where the client can decide not to send something if they don't like it. So like the LLM, there's always a guardrail. The LLM is not going to get to the end user unless it's very consistent, or it gets past that guardrail, and it just can't.
The LLM is really allowed to act where I mean where its actual places in the system is probably what you're thinking about, right? In terms of like a highly regulated environment, like a healthcare system, I don't think the LLM should be in the regulatory part. If A happens, then you should do process B. I don't think you should do that. That should be like enshrined in like deterministic classical workflow stuff. It's not like I shouldn't be like an MCP situation. Like, hey, if LM determines that we should, I'm just making this up, sue that person. And it should call this sue that person API endpoint. I don't think you should do that. You know what I'm saying? At least in certain that's an extreme example.
Yeah, well, you would engineer it so that it would call the propose to sue that person endpoint, and then that would go to a human to review.
Yes. Right. It shouldn't just have access to the hands directly, right?
Yes.
That's what it is. Yeah. But it has absolutely its place should be determining the facts and the recommendations, right? Um, so yeah, but yeah, that's my opinion there.
I think it's a good opinion. I think one of the takeaways one of the takeaways I know I'll be walking away from today's conversation is this understanding, and really a confidence in a confidence knowing that utilizing an LLM or in an AI workflow, I can have it serve the mission of my business, or I can have it serve the position of my business. I don't need to be overly concerned about, oh no, it could just run amok and make all these problems. I'm convinced that if that's the case, it's my fault because I didn't engineer the system the correct way. I can create constraints and workflows that will allow it to operate predictably. And if I need help, I can just ask y'all how to do it. So this is quite perfect.
Please do. We're open.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for your time today and chatting about this. And I hope to have a follow-up to this conversation very soon.
Great. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Code Cognition. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone else who's also building the future of software. We'll see you next time.